Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Nursery Production and Management. Today's video topic is the balled and burlapped B&B production of nursery stock. And I might add that this particular video emphasizes the different harvest methods for balled and burlap plant material. B&B production is not something that's done in Texas anymore. Back in the early days of the nursery industry in Texas, it was in fact used, but today most of the ornamental plants that are grown in the state are grown in containers. So container production is the predominant form of production in the state of Texas. There are, however, nurseries in the Midwest and in the Northeast that still practice balled and burlapped nursery production. So a important question to ask is what exactly is burlap? Burlap is a woven fabric that's usually made from the skin of the jute plant. And the jute plant is native to the Indian subcontinent. Jute fibers are mainly concentrated near the woody central parts of the stalk, and they are high in both cellulose and lignin. Burlap goes by another name. Some people refer to it as hessian. And burlap is an organic and biodegradable product. Okay, the fact that it's biodegradable can be problematic, especially in the case of a horticultural distribution center where balled and burlap plants may be ordered in early spring and then healed in for subsequent sale throughout the summer. So because burlap is a biodegradable product, it may become necessary to remove some of that rotting burlap and re-burlap those soil balls. Okay, this is what burlap fabric looks like. And when you buy it in bulk, you buy it in bales. And you can see the picture of the bales stacked up on the left. Burlap sheets or fabric can come in rolls, or it can come in individual sheets of different sizes depending on the size that you specify and need for your particular production. Burlap is also available as treated burlap. Treated burlap is chemically treated to prevent rot and mildew formation. It does degrade, but it does so more slowly than untreated burlap. And then a third alternative is something called synthetic burlap. And this is manufactured from polypropylene fibers, and it is not biodegradable and does not break down. So let's discuss just for a brief moment what the end user of a balled and burlap product should do with the burlap. And there are lots of different kind of competing ideas and theories about this. I think most people would generally agree that synthetic burlap, like you see pictured here, should definitely be removed right after the plant is placed in the hole. And really the same goes for the untreated and treated burlap, even though they are biodegradable products. To my knowledge, most landscape contractors will generally remove the burlap, or if they don't entirely remove it, they'll at least cut it and pull it down and kind of push it down towards the bottom of the soil ball and then backfill the hole with soil. So generally you want to get the burlap kind of off the root ball, and you generally do this after you've placed the plant in the planting hole, because the burlap can kind of help keep the root system together while you're putting the plant in the hole. Once the plant is in the planting hole and it's situated where you want it, then if it's treated or untreated burlap, you can cut it, remove it, pull it down, push it down towards the bottom of the soil ball, or if you prefer, you can remove it entirely from underneath that soil ball and just take it out of the hole. And the synthetic burlap definitely needs to be removed because it is not biodegradable. Okay, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned that we were going to focus on different harvesting methods for balled and burlap plant material. So obviously balled and burlap plants need to be lined out in the field, and the lining out process would be similar to what we saw for the bare root production of plants. Generally liners are planted in the spring and or fall of the year. Most commonly, you're going to be using a transplanting machine to move down a row, and the operators will be inserting the liners into the little furrow that's made by the planting machine. So they are mechanically planted. And then, of course, while they're growing, they're going to need water, they're going to need weed control, they're going to need fertilizer. These are all cultural things that need to be done to maintain the plants and keep them in top quality. Okay, at some point they're going to require harvesting. And harvesting balled and burlap plants is a very seasonal activity. So you have to think, if you're a northern nursery where the soil freezes during the winter time, you're not going to be able to go out into your fields and start harvest until the soil is thawed, and that may not happen until sometime in late March. If you live in a more southern climate, then you can initiate the balled and burlap harvesting process sooner. So the graph that you're looking at is probably more appropriate for a balled and burlap nursery in a northern climate. And you've got two different axes here. The x-axis, or the one that is horizontal, shows you the different months of the year starting with January through December. And then the y axis, or the vertical axis, shows you the number of balled and burlap plants harvested. So what we see is that in a more northern climate, there's really no activity in January, February, or early March, simply because the ground is frozen. Then finally, when the ground does start to thaw out in late March into April, then the number of balled and burlap plants that are harvested rises very sharply, very dramatically. So in April and through the beginning of May, balled and burlap plants are continuing to be harvested from the field. And then kind of towards mid to late May, at least in a northern climate, the number of balled and burlap plants harvested really starts to drop off. And this is simply because as the plants leaf out, they can't be dug. The reason for this is really very simple. It is estimated that approximately 80% of the root system of a balled and burlap plant is lost when the plant is harvested. So it would be very problematic for the plant to be in the process of leafing out and then to be dug to lose 80% of its root system. So when the plants start to leaf leaf out, then the number of plants harvested drops off dramatically. And then basically during the remainder of the summer, June, July, August, when the plants are in full leaf, there's really no harvesting or very little harvesting going on at all because the plants are in full leaf. It's usually hotter and drier during the summer months, so it wouldn't be a good idea to dig the plant and lose 80% of its root system. And then finally in the fall, for a northern nursery, B&B harvesting can start to pick up again. This is going to be usually the beginning of September, maybe the end of August. The plants are going to lose their leaves anyway because most of these plants are deciduous. So if they are dug and then they drop their leaves all at once, it really doesn't make that much difference because they would have dropped those leaves anyway. So September, October, November, December, you can harvest balled and burlap plants out of the field, and you can continue to do that until the ground freezes. And then once the ground freezes, then that's going to bring an end to balled and burlap harvesting in the field. So again, this diagram is more typical of a northern nursery in Texas. It works something like this. The advantage we have here is since our ground doesn't freeze, then we can kind of start digging plants early or really dig them all winter long if the nursery desired. Okay, methods of harvesting balled and burlap plants. They can be dug by hand, and usually it's going to be the shrubs that are going to be dug by hand, or they can be dug with a machine. And generally the balled and burlap plants that will be machine dug are going to be trees. So in the following slides, we're going to look at the balled and burlapped harvesting process for shrubs. So the example I'm showing you is a shrub that's being dug by hand. And really the process kind of starts with what's called tagging the plant. And tagging the plant is just something that's done to indicate that that particular plant is sold and it's ready to be harvested. And it's probably hard to read, but the plant that they're digging is called Calycanthus floridus. And the size of the plant, I believe, is 30 inches, so its grade is 30 inches tall. And if you remember back when we talked about nursery stock standards for a 30-inch shrub, there is a certain minimum ball diameter and ball depth that's going to need to be dug to meet the standard. Okay, after the plant that is going to be harvested has been identified and tagged, the next step is to tie up the branches, and that's what you see being done in this picture. So the reason this is done is simply to get the branches out of the way so that the plant can be more easily dug by hand. Okay, after the branches have been tied up, then we begin digging and shaping the soil ball, which is what is being done in this picture. So one thing to keep in mind is because balled and burlap plants have a soil ball, they're heavy. Soil is very dense and it's very heavy. So even a plant like this might weigh, 50 pounds, 60 pounds. I don't know for sure, but they're heavy. Okay, in this picture, you can see that a burlap square has been laid on the soil next to the plant that's being harvested. Okay, the harvested plant's soil ball has been shaped, and notice that what they're using to dig the plant is a tool called a spade. So a spade is a type of shovel that has kind of a straight blade. And to be more effective, it's important to keep the spade sharp because you are cutting roots and you want good clean cuts, and it's much easier to cut through the roots with a sharp spade than a dull spade. But also keep in mind that you are only capturing approximately 20% of the root system of the plant. 80% of the roots are going to be left in the field. So in this picture, we're getting ready to lift the plant up out of the hole and set it onto that square of burlap. In this picture, the plant has been set on that burlap square, and now the burlap is pulled up around the soil ball and the corners of the burlap are tied together. Okay, now it's hard to remove the slack from the burlap. When you wrap a soil ball with burlap, there's always going to be a certain amount of slack or extra fabric that needs to be pulled tight. And there are different ways that you can accomplish this. What you're seeing in this picture is kind of more of the older traditional method of removing the slack from the burlap, and they're using something called burlap nails. Now the nail is inserted into the burlap and it's used to kind of pull that burlap tight. Now keep in mind that there are always problems with using nails. Number one, injury. It'd be easy to stick the point of the nail into your finger and injure yourself. Number two, sometimes these nails drop out or come out. And if they come out in the holding yard, it's possible that they could puncture the tire of some vehicle that happens to be traversing through the holding yard. So nails are problematic. They're kind of a cheap, inexpensive way of removing the slack from the burlap, but they can also create problems. Okay, after the slack has been removed from the burlap, the next step is to tie up the ball with something called sisal twine. And sisal twine is a biodegradable twine. Okay, so there you have it. This is the finished product. This is a balled and burlapped calycanthus shrub ready to be picked up and brought to the nursery holding yard. So you can see it's got a nice soil ball that's been well shaped. The ball is flat on the bottom so that the shrub can stand up. The soil ball has been wrapped with burlap. The slack has been taken out of the burlap using burlap nails. And then finally, as an extra added measure of security, the soil ball has been wrapped with or tied up with sisal twine. Okay, so that was hand harvesting using a spade and a shrub as an example. So now let's take a look at a series of images that talk about machine harvest using a mechanical spade. So these tree spades or tree diggers can be mounted on different types of equipment. A fairly common piece of equipment is something like a skid steer loader. Bobcat is one brand. There are other brands. So the spade itself has several brands of those out there. This one happens to be a Vermeer brand, and you need to kind of match your spade with the um, Bobcat or whatever skid steer loader you're mounting the spade onto. So you can see that there are hydraulic spades that can move into the ground to dig the plant. And then once the plant has been dug, the machine can pull the entire tree up out of the ground. So that's what you're seeing in this picture. The plant has been harvested. Now the operator is backing off on those spades just a little bit so that someone on the ground can take a spade and shape the bottom of that soil ball. So we want to put a flat bottom on the soil ball. And really this is simply so the plant stands up in the holding yard, but also so that it stands up in whatever planting hole the landscape contractor makes. It would be difficult to get a tree with a pointed tip to the soil ball to stand up straight in the planting hole. So that's why they take a spade and flatten off the bottom of the soil ball. Okay, and then really the same thing happens to the tree that we saw with the shrub. The soil ball is going to be wrapped with burlap. The corners of the burlap are kind of pulled up and tied together. Now, one thing that's very different in this picture from the picture of the shrub harvest that we saw earlier is here the operator is not using burlap nails. This particular operator is inserting closed C-rings with a special tool. So this is a tool that was modified from the upholstery industry, and it's a tool that will put a closed C-ring into the burlap fabric. And these rings don't fall out like burlap nails do. And it's kind of a little bit safer for the operator because there are no sharp nail tips to damage or hurt your hand on. And all you do is just kind of push the tip of this machine into the burlap, and it will insert a C-ring into the burlap. So what you see being done here is the slack is being taken out of the burlap around the soil ball. Now, alternatively, when some trees are harvested, they are put into what are called wire baskets. So you can see that there's a wire basket that's been set on the ground, and then there is a burlap sock that's been placed inside that basket. So the spade operator has harvested a tree, and the operator is bringing that tree to the basket, and the operator will insert the harvested tree into the burlap sock that's been inserted into this basket. So when you buy the socks and the wire baskets, you have to match them up to the size tree spade that you have. Okay, so once the tree has been inserted into the sock and the basket, then somebody will come along with that C-ring inserter, and they'll insert some C-rings to take the slack out of the burlap. And then in this particular picture, the operator is using a special tool to turn and crimp the wire of the basket to kind of pull it tight around the soil ball. So it brings up some questions. When do you use a wire basket and when don't you use a wire basket? Well, let's take a look at some answers to those questions. So when do you want to use a wire basket? So one question you have to ask is, will the soil type hold a ball? So if you're operating the tree spade and you notice that as you're setting that plant on the ground that the soil is starting to crumble or fall away from the soil ball, then you might be in a particular area of the nursery where maybe the clay content of the soil is not real high and the ball is not holding very well. So this might be a case where you would want to use a wire basket. Another consideration is if the plants are going to be shipped, and trees would usually be shipped on a flatbed trailer, and the load of trees would typically be tarped after the loading had been completed. If they're going to be shipped great distances, then it might be a good idea to put a wire basket on those soil balls because as that trailer moves along the interstate highway, there's going to be a lot of vibration and bouncing that could knock the soil loose from the soil ball. So a wire basket will kind of help keep all that together so that the trees arrive at their destination with the soil ball intact. And then another big point of contention in the nursery industry is whether the wire baskets should be left on by the landscape contractor or whether they should be removed or partially removed when the tree is planted. And this is actually a discussion for a different class when we teach landscape management in the spring. We'll talk more about wire baskets and whether they should be left on, partially removed, or completely removed after planting. So in this picture, you're looking at several balled and burlap trees that have been harvested with a tree spade, and they are basically just lying in the field waiting to be picked up and brought to the holding yard. Okay, this is an example of a holding yard. So a holding yard is, again, simply an area in a nursery. It may be paved or it may have a gravel base like you see here. It's just a place to store plant material until it's either shipped or picked up by the landscape contractor. So here are several trees that have been harvested and now they're in the holding yard. Some of these trees have wire baskets on their soil balls, others do not. The tree protectors, which are those white tubes, those are around the trunk and they can serve several different purposes. A lot of nurseries will put a tree protector around the trunk, especially in the fall if there's deer activity. The deer like to rub their antlers on the tree trunks, which can damage the trunks of the trees, and this type of protector kind of helps prevent that. This also just kind of prevents loading damage and transporting damage. It just is there to protect the trunk of the tree from any kind of mechanical damage that could occur during the harvesting, loading, and shipping process. Once the tree has reached the final destination, the landscape contractor can go ahead and remove that tree guard. Okay, this is just kind of an interesting tractor. This is what's called a tree boss. It is a articulated robotic tree handling system. So it is a way to, pick up harvested trees that might be in the holding yard and, put them on trailers so they can be shipped to their destination. You only need a single operator to use this machine. This machine can also pick up harvested trees that are still in the field and put them on wagons so that they can be brought into the holding yard. So it's a way to just pick up trees and load or unload them as needed. Trencher digging is another way to harvest a balled and burlap tree. It's going to be slower than a tree spade, much slower than a tree spade, but if you're only talking about one or two trees, it is a way that you can harvest a balled and burlap tree. So you can see that this is a soil trencher. And what we're doing is we're digging a trench around the tree that's being harvested. Okay, and this is a pretty good sized tree. And you can see that one worker is in the hole or in the trench that was made by the trencher. And this worker is using his spade to kind of shape and form the soil ball. Okay, so again, in this picture, we're shaping the soil ball with a spade. And you can see if you look at the picture, and see if I can draw on this picture. I'll pick yellow here. All right, you see kind of a series of like what look like little white shaped things. Well, guess what those are? Those are roots that have been cut during the harvesting process. So when we say that approximately 20% of the root system remains in the soil ball, well, the roots get cut and approximately 80% of the root system remains in the soil. Okay, and because this is such a big tree, the burlap is actually added in sections, so there may be one or two pieces of burlap that are used to wrap the sides of the soil ball, and then there's another piece of burlap that would be used for the top. And the people that do this kind of work are highly skilled, and what they're able to do is actually sew or stitch these different pieces of burlap together to create one nice package. So if you look right here, so there's a seam right there where the burlap has been stitched together. And then of course all around the top piece has been attached to the side piece by another seam. So at this point in the harvesting process, they're using sisal twine to kind of what they call drum lace this particular soil ball. All right, and because this is such an enormous tree, they're using a Caterpillar tractor with a U-blade, and then there's kind of a strap that's attached to the U-blade. That strap goes right here around the tree and then kind of up the other side. And then this tree is lifted up out of the ground. So really the last step is to go ahead and finish off the bottom of the soil ball and put burlap on that. Okay, we looked earlier at bare root plant production and we saw that there were advantages and disadvantages to bare root production, and the same applies to balled and burlap production. One advantage is that when you harvest a balled and burlapped plant, you get a soil ball of native soil that's kept with the roots. You can harvest some very large trees, balled in burlap. Okay, less water is used compared to container-grown plants. So what we mean by this is, during the production process, as the trees and shrubs are growing in the field, because they're actually growing in soil rather than in potting medium that's in a container, overall there's less water used to irrigate the crop than you would use if you were growing a comparable crop in a container. On the disadvantage side, you're removing soil from your production field every time you harvest a plant balled and burlapped. So imagine doing this every year for 20 or 25 years. Every time you harvest a tree or a shrub from the field, you're losing a certain amount of soil that's leaving the field with the plant you just harvested. Because soil is heavy, balled and burlap trees and shrubs are very, very heavy, and to ship them, it's going to cost more money. Think about a bare root tree or a bare root shrub that doesn't have any soil around the root system at all. Those plants are much lighter in weight. And then, of course, the root loss. As I mentioned earlier in the video, it's estimated that about 80% or more of the roots are lost during the harvest of balled and burlapped plants. Balled and burlap trees and shrubs are seasonally available depending upon when they can be dug. Very early in the video, I showed you the graph that showed peak harvesting in the spring before the plants leafed out, and then harvesting resuming in the fall as the plants are going dormant. But during the middle of the summer, you're not digging balled and burlap plants, so they're not going to be as available during that time frame. Okay, so this is a video when you get to the full PowerPoint version. This is a video that I would recommend you watch. This is harvesting a large honey locust tree using a tree spade. And this one is a must-see video. This is harvesting a Compton oak, which is a natural hybrid between an overcup oak and a live oak. And this is actually in Texas. So this video was taken in League City, Texas, and they're moving a 100-year-old Compton oak. So definitely a must-see video. You'll want to watch this one for sure. All right, and that's all I've got. So that has been primarily the harvesting of balled and burlap nursery stock from the field. Thank you so much for watching.